It's one of the most often criticised aspects of how the state operates, the direct provision system.
For some, it's a modern-day version of the Magdalen laundries.
But the designers of the system didn't see it that way.
So where did direct provision come from, and how does it operate? The system was set up in 1999 to house people seeking asylum here while their applications were processed by the state. Most of the centres are now former B&Bs or basic hotels, but others are caravan parks or former holiday camps.
The latest figures show 6,355 people are living in the 40 or so centres across the country. That's 200 people more than the Department of Justice's stated capacity for the whole system.
But despite the system and the accommodation being set up for short-term stays, it hasn't worked out like that. 40% spend more than 2 years in direct provision.
I think the way we live, it's inhuman. It's okay to live in a direct provision for a certain time, but not for 5 years or more. You can't move on. You don't heal because you feel stuck in the same place. You are still stuck in that moment that drove you to come out of your country and come here.
And remember, about 1/3 of all of those in the system are children.
This is my home for the past 4 years. I've been living here with my husband and my 3 children. And this is our sitting area. And this is where we eat. This is where we study, my children study.
People living in direct provision receive a small weekly welfare payment, initially about €20 per adult, about €10 per child.
In the last year or so, some have been permitted to work, but up until then, none were, while access to subsidised education finishes with secondary school.
People who support the system say it's right that asylum applicants should be discouraged from putting down roots, from working or studying in local communities. They say until refugee status is granted, their applications could be rejected. And if people are coming and going, community cohesion could be damaged as a result.
But others argue refusing access to work and education is isolating people in direct provision centres and causing problems between locals and applicants. They say because people are being placed into accommodation for lengthy periods, they should be given the chance to work, study and contribute to the local community.
To be honest, I don't want to be sitting around on €19 a week. I want to go to college. I want to get a job. You know, I want to be able to fend for myself, have my own apartment.
So how did we end up with what we have now? Well, to really understand that, you need to understand what was going on in Ireland when direct provision was being set up.
The government has made it clear it intends taking direct action to tackle the growing number of asylum seekers.
Relatively speaking, Ireland took in very few refugees up to the 1990s, and before 2000, asylum seekers could even access certain social welfare payments.
Recent figures show that between 4,000 and 5,000 people will apply for asylum during the coming year. That's around twice the 1996 figure, which in turn was around double the figure of 1995.
The Justice Minister today announced he was setting up an advisory committee on racism, which would have a budget of £20,000 for 1998. However, some believe his department is partly responsible for the rise in racism because of the way it deals with applications for asylum. Months, even years pass as thousands wait to find out if they will be allowed to stay.
That when I took office in June of 1997, it is true that there was a complete and utter shambles. There was about 20 people working in the asylum section of the department dealing with thousands and thousands of applications.
As 1998 turned to 1999 and the Celtic tiger began to roar, crisis struck in the Balkans, and there was a significant rise in the number of people seeking asylum here.
Since NATO launched its airstrikes, the UNHCR has received offers for 135,000 places in 39 countries.
With the growing number of applicants, as well as housing shortages in Dublin, there were fears among officials and politicians and in the media that we could become the target of large-scale immigration fraud.
The headline spoke about public services at breaking point and evidence of growing racial tensions.
In recent times, Ireland has become attractive to Eastern Europe's gypsies, people who have been wandering Europe for centuries and who lost thousands of men, women and children to the gas chambers of Auschwitz during the Nazi persecutions.
There's a particular concern amongst people that there's too many asylum seekers in this area and that it's giving a ghettoised effect
the important thing, I think, for the asylum seekers and the refugees that there is a certain spread, that it's not all a congregational issue, because that quite frankly is what causes a lot of the local difficulty.
With that in mind, not to mention our humanitarian obligations, direct provision was born.
The minister said that many countries throughout Europe were now catering for asylum seekers by directly providing food, clothing and healthcare instead of social welfare payments.
It was out of this political climate over these years that the system was set up, developed and grew through the early 2000s.
The number of applicants peaked in 2002 at 11,500, and the number of direct provision centres grew along with it.
But over the next 2 years, applications fell dramatically.
That was down to a few things. A Supreme Court judgment in 2003 allowed the state to legally deport parents of children who'd been born in Ireland.
That raised further questions about our citizenship laws, and the following year, a referendum was held in which the Irish people voted to remove the automatic right to citizenship for anyone born here.
And around the same time, fines were introduced aimed at punishing airlines carrying passengers who didn't have the right documentation to enter Ireland.
The number of applicants levelled off over the next few years, falling and rising again with the changing economy. It's up again recently and reached a 10-year high last year at 3,600.
Relatively speaking, this is a small number. In Germany, in 2017 alone, for example, 750,000 people applied for asylum.
Here, in recent years, the issue hasn't so much been the number of people applying, but the impact the direct provision system has been having on people staying in centres.
You're very small, confined spaces, very little privacy for either children or their parents. Places I saw children doing homework on a floor because there wasn't enough room. They wouldn't have enough space or accommodation to have a table to do their homework.
Direct provision has been criticised by several international agencies. Critics say it should be shut down due to human rights concerns. They say it destroys family life, that parents and children can't bond because often there's no privacy, there's no cooking facilities, there's no ways to just say, take the kids down to the park or have friends over on a play date.
They say children's education is stifled and the whole system is damaging to adults who fled horrendous abuse, war or torture. In recent years, a series of protests and significant media attention resulted in the government streamlining application procedures, increasing allowances and allowing some asylum seekers to work.
But many say that overall the system hasn't changed enough. The living conditions remain unsuitable for long periods. Some going as far as to say that the direct provision residents of today will be the subject of costly inquiries and the potential compensation schemes of the future.